At exactly 2:47 a.m., in the dead silence of a snowstorm, a Siberian Husky stood at the front door of a cabin, gripping a baby in his jaws. Behind him, fire, and two barefoot parents chasing him in pure panic. What could make a dog steal a baby in the middle of the night? The wind whispered secrets through the pine trees, rustling branches like ghostly fingers tapping against frosted windows. It was the kind of night where the world felt suspended, caught between the howl of winter and the breathless pause of something about to break. At exactly 2:47 a.m., a low growl stirred the silence inside a cabin tucked away on the outskirts of Helena, Montana. Outside, snowflakes tumbled thick and lazy, coating everything in a white hush. But inside, something was shifting, a subtle change in the air, barely noticeable to human senses. To most, it would have gone unnoticed, but not to Shadow. The husky's body curled tight at the base of the crib in the nursery, tensed like a taut wire. His ears flicked back, then forward. The fire in the stone hearth down the hall had long since faded into glowing embers. The world was still. But his instincts weren't wrong. Something was coming. Shadow lifted his head slowly, nostrils flaring. He sniffed again. There it was. Faint, metallic, wrong. He pushed himself up silently, muscles rippling under thick winter fur, and padded to the door of the nursery. His nails clicked softly against the hardwood, just once. Then silence again. Baby Luna let out a quiet sigh in her sleep, her tiny chest rising and falling under a soft quilt. Her fingers twitched, caught in a dream only babies understand. Shadow didn't wait. He scratched the nursery door once with a quick flick of his paw, then used his nose to nudge it open farther. The old cabin's hinges creaked slightly, the sound almost swallowed by the thick snow blanketing the roof. In the master bedroom across the hall, Natalie stirred, but didn't wake. Natalie Taylor had always been a light sleeper, ever since giving birth to Luna. Her maternal senses, fine-tuned and ever alert, had saved her from many close calls with bottles knocked over, diapers left unsealed, and toys placed too close to the crib's edge. But that night, even the whisper of Shadow's paw against the door didn't pull her fully from sleep. She shifted under the quilt and turned toward James, her husband, who lay on his side facing away, snoring softly. The room was warm, too warm in fact. Natalie blinked. She wasn't sure if she'd dreamed it, but something tugged at the edge of her consciousness. A crackle, a hiss, or maybe a scent. She reached over, feeling for the baby monitor on the nightstand. The green light blinked, steady and calm. Everything's fine. She closed her eyes again. In the nursery, Shadow made his move. The dog approached the crib with caution, not out of fear but precision. His snout lowered, breath hot in the cold room, and he let out a quiet, whimpering whine. Then, with the gentleness of a seasoned guardian, he reached for the corner of Luna's blanket and began to pull. Inch by inch. The blanket shifted. So did Luna. Shadow had never done anything like this before. He was a good dog, trained, loyal, obedient to a fault. But in that moment, none of it mattered. What pushed him forward wasn't training. It wasn't logic. It was a force older than commands or rules, instinct, that primal connection between protector and innocent, between guardian and life. Luna stirred. Her little hand flopped over the edge of the blanket as she rolled slightly to her side. Shadow stopped. He nosed her softly, making sure she was secure. Then he gripped the fabric again and resumed his work. He tugged until she slid gently toward the edge of the crib, her head nestled into the thick folds of the blanket, still sleeping. Then, carefully, Shadow maneuvered his teeth closer and latched onto the thickest fold, a spot far from her body. With calculated strength, he pulled her over the lip of the crib and onto the floor, where the blanket cushioned the impact. He paused. In the hallway, no sound. He looked once toward the master bedroom, then back at Luna. His body trembled with urgency. Not fear, urgency. Natalie's eyes opened fast. The baby monitor crackled, then went quiet. She sat up, her heart thumping. "James?" she whispered, touching his shoulder. "James, did you hear that?" He groaned. "Hear what?" She fumbled for the monitor again, this time turning up the volume. Nothing. Then, just as she was about to set it down, a rustle came through. A faint dragging sound. And another whine. Her pulse jumped. "Oh my God, I think Shadow's in the nursery." James sat up quickly, the sleep peeling off his face like fog from a mirror. "What?" "I heard something. He's dragging something." Together, they threw off the covers and bolted out of bed. Bare feet slapped against the cold hardwood. Natalie's breath hitched as she pushed the nursery door fully open. Her scream pierced the hallway. "Luna!" Shadow stood at the doorway, his jaws still locked gently around the blanket as he pulled their baby, now fully out of the crib, toward the front of the house. "Shadow, stop!" But the dog didn't obey. Instead, he let out a loud, sharp bark. Not aggressive, urgent. He looked at them, then at the front door, then barked again. James hesitated. Wait, he's not trying to hurt her. Then what the hell is he doing? And then they smelled it. Smoke. The scent wasn't thick, not yet. It came in like a thread of warning, curling up from the floor vents and under the hallway's edges. Acrid, dry, electrical. James's eyes went wide. The furnace. Natalie turned just in time to see a faint orange flicker cast a glow under the basement door. "Jesus Christ," James whispered. "The house is on fire." Shadow gave another bark, now lunging toward the front door, blanket dragging behind him. Natalie bent to grab Luna, who whimpered now, half awake, confused, but safe. James rushed to the front door, yanking it open as a gust of freezing wind and snow blasted inside. They ran. The world outside was a different universe. Wind screamed across the open fields. Snow swirled like restless spirits under a steel-gray sky. Natalie clutched Luna tightly to her chest, wrapping her arms around the blanket as the cold bit into her skin. James grabbed a spare coat hanging by the door and tossed it over her shoulders before slamming the door shut behind them. Shadow bounded ahead, paws crunching through deep snow, his breath visible in short clouds. He stopped just beyond the porch steps, turning back, his eyes scanning every movement. Behind them, the house groaned, a low, creaking moan that came from somewhere deep in its bones. A flash of light flickered in the living room window. The fire had spread fast, too fast. James staggered out to the edge of the driveway, slipping once before regaining balance. "The neighbors," he said between breaths. "We need help." Natalie's teeth chattered as she shielded Luna's face from the snow. "Call 911. Now!" James fumbled in his robe pocket, but his phone wasn't there. He cursed under his breath and looked around. Most of the neighboring homes were dark, their roofs sagging under fresh snow. Then, as if summoned by panic, a porch light blinked on across the road. Within minutes, red and blue lights painted the snowy landscape. The wail of sirens cut through the night like knives through ice. Fire trucks screamed up the long road, tires skidding slightly on the slick pavement. Firefighters poured out, barking orders, dragging hoses, and slamming axes against doors and boards. Natalie and James stood off to the side, wrapped in emergency blankets, holding Luna between them. Shadow sat at their feet, steam rising from his soaked fur, his chest heaving. But his eyes never left the house. One firefighter ran to them. "Everyone out?" he asked quickly. James nodded. "Yes, thanks to him." He pointed down at the dog. The firefighter looked at Shadow, eyebrows lifting. "He got you out?" "He saved our daughter," Natalie whispered, her voice barely holding steady. "He pulled her from the crib, dragged her to the door." The firefighter's eyes softened. He reached down and scratched behind Shadow's ear. "Smart boy." Shadow leaned in slightly, still watching the fire. The fire had started in the basement furnace, an old unit the Taylors had planned to replace in spring. But spring never came in time. Within 15 minutes, the fire had crawled up the laundry chute, ignited a curtain, then leapt onto the old wooden framing of the kitchen ceiling. It was a hungry thing now, orange tongues licking across drywall and cabinets like it had been waiting years for a feast. But no one was trapped inside. No lives were lost. No tragedy carved itself permanently into that frozen night. All because of a dog. By 5 a.m., the fire was out. The house was still standing. But the entire back half, kitchen, basement, parts of the attic, was gone. Charred, waterlogged, and blackened with smoke. Natalie sat in the neighbor's living room, a cup of tea going cold in her hands. Luna lay asleep on her lap, unaware of how close the world had come to collapsing. James stood by the window, arms crossed, staring out at the smoldering ruin. His eyes were rimmed red, not from smoke, but from what might have been. Shadow lay beside the couch, wrapped in a towel, a bowl of water untouched near his front paw. He hadn't eaten, he hadn't slept. He just stayed there, alert, waiting. When Natalie reached down and gently placed her hand on his head, he let out a long breath, the first relaxed exhale in hours. A few days later, after the insurance adjusters had come and gone, After news reporters had swarmed and left, and after the fire tape was peeled away, James knelt down beside Shadow in the yard. The snow was melting now. Patches of brown grass peeked out. He cupped the dog's face in his hands and looked him in the eyes. "I've known a lot of people in my life," he whispered, "but none like you." Shadow stared back, unmoving. "You didn't just save our daughter," James continued. "You saved us, all of us." He leaned forward and pressed his forehead to the dog's. "Thank you." The story spread like wildfire. Local papers ran headlines. Hero Husky saves baby from house fire. Montana family owes lives to rescue dog. Even national news picked it up. A video of Shadow being given a medal by the fire department went viral. Children drew pictures of him. A bakery made dog-shaped cookies in his honor. People mailed gifts, letters, blankets, toys. But Shadow didn't care for any of it. He only cared that Luna was safe. Every night, even in the temporary rental house, he curled up beneath her crib, eyes half closed, ears still listening. Spring came slowly that year. Montana thawed inch by inch, the snowbanks retreating under reluctant sun. Natalie would sometimes sit on the porch steps of their temporary rental, watching the trees drip. The smell of soot still clung to her winter coat. Even now, with Luna safe and healthy, she couldn't shake the memory of that night, the moment between breath and terror, between sleep and fire. Inside, Shadow was curled up beside Luna's playpen, his eyes closed, but his ears still twitched with every creak of the old floor. Natalie leaned her head against the doorway and watched them both, her daughter babbling to herself in soft syllables, and the dog that had dragged her from death's edge. "You okay, big guy?" she whispered. Shadow opened one eye, just for a moment, then closed it again. 3 weeks after the fire, Station 6 sent a delegation. 2 fire trucks pulled into the driveway, lights off but polished to gleam. Kids from the neighborhood lined the sidewalk, clutching homemade signs. "Shadow the hero! Huskies have heart!" One firefighter, Captain Brooks, stepped out carrying something wrapped in velvet. James met him at the door. "We wanted to do this in person," Brooks said. He opened the small box to reveal a custom dog collar, black leather, trimmed in brass. In the center, a plate was engraved, "Shadow Guardian of the Taylor Family." February 17th, 2025, a hero without words, James swallowed hard. "He doesn't wear collars." Brooks smiled. "Then hang it somewhere high, so you remember." James looked down at Shadow, who stood quietly behind him, tail giving a single thump against the doorframe. It took nearly 2 months before they could safely walk through the old house. The structure had been cleared by engineers, the smell of smoke now faint but permanent. Natalie's boots crunched over scorched tile. She paused in the hallway where the baby monitor had once sat. It was melted, a warped ghost of plastic. She moved to Luna's old room. The crib was still there, blackened, empty. She knelt beside it and ran her fingers across the edge, her touch tracing invisible lines of memory. Then she turned toward the door, the one Shadow had opened, the one that had started everything. She didn't cry. She just nodded once. "Good boy," she whispered. Luna's first word wasn't "Mama." It wasn't "Dada" either. It was "Sha." Shadow had been lying beside her on a picnic blanket outside the rental, his head resting on crossed paws, when she suddenly reached out with a stubby finger and poked his nose. "Sha!" she giggled. Natalie gasped. James spun around from the grill. "What'd she say?" Luna did it again, this time with both hands gripping Shadow's fur. "Sha!" Shadow didn't move, just wagged his tail. James laughed. "Guess she knows who really saved her." By summer, reconstruction on the cabin had begun. Contractors moved in, tearing down damaged walls and hauling out soaked furniture. But Natalie had one request. The nursery would be rebuilt exactly the same. Same dimensions, same window, same crib placement. Shadow supervised every day, trotting behind the foreman and sniffing lumber. The workers joked he was the new safety inspector. One even brought him beef jerky every morning. When the project was nearly complete, James climbed into the attic. Hidden under a scorched beam, he found a scrap of Luna's original quilt. Slightly burnt, edges curled, but intact. He brought it down and framed it. They hung it by the crib. A month after the rebuild, Natalie received a call from a nonprofit based in Denver. "We're launching a campaign," the woman said, "about animal heroes. Dogs who saved lives. Shadow's story touched us deeply. We'd like to feature him." Natalie hesitated. "We're not really media people." "You don't have to be," Just you, your family, and the truth. The feature aired online, then on national TV. A 3-minute segment showed photos of the fire, of Shadow beside Luna, of the collar and the charred baby monitor. The closing shot was Natalie's voice. In that moment, it wasn't the alarms. It wasn't luck. It was Shadow. He saw what we couldn't. And because of him, we get to live this ordinary, beautiful life. 2 years later, Luna ran barefoot through autumn leaves in their backyard. Her curls bounced with each step. Shadow, now with graying whiskers, padded behind her at a slower pace but never let her get far. "Come on, Sha!" she called. "We're adventurers today." He huffed and gave chase. Natalie watched from the porch, coffee in hand. James joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulder. "He's getting old," he said softly. "So are we." He still guards her, though. Always will. And as Luna tripped and fell giggling into a pile of leaves, Shadow immediately planted himself beside her, nudging her up with his nose. She threw her arms around his neck. "You're my favorite," she whispered into his fur. 5 years after the fire, on a quiet October night, Shadow didn't get up from his bed. Luna, now 5 and full of curiosity, climbed beside him, her little hands stroking his back. "Shadow?" she asked. He opened one eye, licked her cheek, then laid his head down again. That night, with the family around him, Shadow took his last breath under a sky full of stars. Natalie cried quietly. James held her hand. Luna fell asleep, curled next to him, arms wrapped around his neck like she used to as a baby. They buried him under the old spruce tree, the one that had survived the fire, strong and blackened but still standing. James carved a simple stone, Shadow. He guarded more than the door. He guarded our hearts. Luna brings him flowers every week. Sometimes she talks to him, tells him stories about school, about friends, about dreams. Natalie watches from the porch and knows. Their family was shaped by that night. But their love, their bond, was made stronger by one loyal heart. When tragedy comes, it doesn't always knock. Sometimes it crawls in through old vents and forgotten faults, waiting for just one spark. But sometimes, too, salvation doesn't shout. It waits, watches, and acts. Shadow didn't save the Taylors because he was trained to. He did it because he felt it. Because something inside him knew the line between life and death and wouldn't let it be crossed. He wasn't just a dog. He was a guardian, a hero. And in one snow-choked night in Montana, he reminded the world what love, pure, wordless love, can do.